First, let's look at this photo, which appears to be just an ordinary shot of an airplane preparing for takeoff at an airport. A normal scene, nothing unusual about it. But when you zoom in, you'll notice a shocking detail. And that's precisely the final moment of our story's protagonist, Keith Sapsford. Keith was born in 1956 in Sydney, Australia, an unfortunate 14-year-old boy. From a young age, he was fascinated by adventure stories and wanted to travel everywhere. His parents had taken him on trips, but that wasn't enough to satisfy him. Keith frequently ran away from home to wander around. His parents had to search for him and bring him back multiple times, even sending him to boarding school to keep him in place. But after just 2 weeks, Keith found a way to escape again. And this time, it would be his final adventure. On February 21, 1970, Keith ran to Kingsford Smith Airport in Sydney. Back then, aviation security wasn't nearly as strict as it is today. He slipped into the aircraft area and approached a Douglas DC-8 that was preparing for a flight to Tokyo. Near the landing gear, there was a small empty compartment, just big enough for a person to crawl into, and Keith crawled in. The DC-8 slowly taxied and then took off. As it happened, that day there was an amateur photographer named John Gilpin on the ground who was coincidentally taking pictures of airplanes. A week later, when developing his film, he was horrified to discover that among the photos he had taken, there was one that sent chills down his spine. Here is the photograph capturing the moment Keith fell from the plane. In the frame, we can see a small dot. That's Keith, sucked out of the wheel well and dropping straight toward the ground. It's believed he fell from a height of 200 feet. Clearly, at this height, Keith couldn't have survived. And if you're wondering, even if Keith hadn't fallen out, he still wouldn't have survived because inside the landing gear compartment, temperatures can drop to dozens of degrees below zero and there's virtually no oxygen for him to breathe. Second, this photograph is linked to the last public execution in French history. Our next main character here is Eugen Weidmann, born into a normal working-class family in 1908 in Germany. With a criminal record for theft, after his release from prison, he and his accomplices planned to kidnap wealthy individuals for ransom. Eugen's most notorious case was likely the murder of a famous American actress. In July 1937, Jeanne de Coven, 21 years old, an American dancer actress, came to Paris to travel and visit relatives. Weidmann approached her with his charm, promising the young woman career opportunities. The girl naively trusted Weidmann and went home with him, where she was subsequently strangled to death by Weidmann. All her belongings, money, and jewelry were stolen by Weidmann. Her body was then buried behind his house's garden. By the end of 1937, French police had arrested Weidmann. The case caused a major sensation, with the press calling it one of the most horrific crimes of that era. After numerous trials in 1939, he was sentenced to death. The sentence was carried out on the morning of June 17, 1939, right in front of Saint-Pierre prison in Versailles. They crowded on sidewalks, climbed onto rooftops, windows, even telephone poles to wait for the moment when the guillotine blade would fall. Among them were reporters, photographers, and ordinary citizens who simply wanted to see for themselves. According to historical records, when the blade dropped, the crowd was far from silent. On the contrary, many people applauded and cheered. Some even rushed forward, dipping handkerchiefs in the pool of blood as souvenirs. These images quickly appeared in the press, causing widespread revulsion. This is the photograph taken at the scene showing the chaotic yet barbaric spectacle. An excited crowd treating the execution like entertainment to be enjoyed. Under public pressure, the French government realized that public executions no longer served as a deterrent, but had become a form of bloody entertainment. Eugen Weidmann's 1939 execution became the milestone that ended the centuries-old tradition of public executions. From then on, all death sentences had to be carried out privately behind prison gates, without public witnessing. Third, at first glance, this appears to be just another photograph taken at a New York subway station. But hidden behind it lies a case that shocked the public and sparked years of controversy. Ki-Suk Han, 58, was a Korean immigrant living with his wife and children in Queens, New York. Friends and colleagues often described him as gentle, responsible, and calm. He devoted most of his time to work and family, rarely getting involved in conflicts. However, on the afternoon of December 3, 2012, everything changed. That day, Han was at the 49th Street station. In a drunken state, he got into an argument with Naeem Davis, a 30-year-old homeless man. Security cameras showed Han following, even grabbing Davis's shirt and threatening him. Despite repeated attempts to avoid confrontation, Davis eventually pushed Han away in self-defense. Han staggered, lost his balance, and fell onto the tracks just as a train was barreling into the station. Just seconds later, tragedy struck. Han died instantly when hit by the oncoming train. In the image, Han helplessly tries to climb back onto the platform, the train's headlight illuminating his body. The entire moment was captured by Umar Abbasi, a freelance photographer who happened to be on the platform. He fired off shots while using his camera flash, hoping to signal the train operator. The next day, the New York Post ran the photograph on its front page with a stark headline, "Doomed." The photo immediately caused an uproar, not only for its haunting nature, but also for the ethical questions it raised. Why did the photographer choose to take pictures instead of rushing to help? Naeem Davis was arrested immediately after the incident and charged with second-degree murder. The public automatically assumed he was the perpetrator, partly due to the impact of the photograph. But it took 5 years, at his 2017 trial, for Davis to be acquitted. Evidence showed that Han was intoxicated and had been the aggressor. Nevertheless, family and friends still struggled to accept this truth, as it completely contradicted the image of the calm husband and father they had known. The fourth photograph is about one of Japan's most serious nuclear accidents. The guy in the picture is Hisashi Uchi, a 35-year-old technician working at the Tokaimura nuclear fuel reprocessing facility. On September 30th, 1999, Uchi and 2 colleagues were assigned to prepare a uranium solution for the reactor. Instead of following strict procedures, they used metal buckets to pour uranium directly into the reaction tank. This seemingly time-saving action triggered an uncontrolled chain reaction. When they poured nearly 19 kilograms of uranium into the reaction tank, 7 times the permitted limit, a blue flash appeared. This was Cherenkov radiation. Uchi was standing right next to the tank, receiving the full massive dose of radiation. According to records, his entire body absorbed 17 sieverts, the highest level ever recorded in a person who remained alive immediately after the accident. Just 8 sieverts is enough to cause death, so this number was almost beyond imagination. Uchi was taken to a Tokyo hospital. Initially, he remained conscious and even felt quite healthy and could talk normally. But just hours later, his skin began to blister and peel, and he vomited large amounts of blood. All stem cells in his bone marrow were destroyed, leaving his body essentially unable to produce red or white blood cells. To help you better understand, Uchi's body then was weaker than someone with end-stage HIV/AIDS. Doctors attempted bone marrow transplants and continuous blood transfusions, but his body had virtually no ability to recover. During 83 days in the hospital, Uchi experienced what experts call walking ghost syndrome, meaning his body remained biologically alive, but inside he was gradually decomposing at the cellular level. Medical photographs showed his condition worsening daily, though they were rarely released publicly due to their horrific nature. Finally, after numerous complications and multiple organ failure, Hisashi Uchi died on December 21, 1999. The Tokaimura accident resulted in 3 people suffering severe radiation exposure, with Uchi being the most tragic case. Of the other 2, one lived an additional 7 months before dying from radiation exposure, while the other was fortunately treated successfully and lived normally. Fifth, and finally, we have an airplane window with some dark smudges on the glass. This photo might seem unremarkable, but in reality, this is a photograph taken at the exact moment Flight TE901 was crashing into Mount Erebus, one of New Zealand's greatest aviation disasters. On November 28, 1979, an Air New Zealand DC-10 took off from Auckland for a special sightseeing flight. On board were 237 passengers and crew members, along with guide Peter Mulgrew, a veteran mountaineer who had been to Antarctica many times. He stood at the front of the cabin holding a microphone, introducing the scenery below to everyone. "We are flying over Antarctica." Unlike regular commercial flights, Flight TE901 allowed passengers to stand up and move throughout the cabin to take photographs. When Peter told them to look left, the entire crowd immediately rushed to the windows to admire the pristine white ice coastline. Minutes later, he directed them to look right, where an enormous mountain appeared, Erebus. People pressed their camera lenses against the windows, seizing the chance to capture this rare sight. Just seconds later, the aircraft shook violently. A passenger accidentally pressed the shutter, leaving behind this photograph with dark smoke streaks on the window glass. No one knew these were traces from the aircraft's own engines, as it was about to crash into the mountainside. Flight TE901 was supposed to circle around Erebus so passengers could witness the volcano from a distance. But an error in entering coordinates into the navigation system had sent the DC-10 straight toward a death trap. In whiteout conditions, when ice, snow, and sky blend into one, the pilots never realized that what lay ahead wasn't flat terrain, but the slope of Mount Erebus itself. The aircraft exploded as it slammed into the mountainside at an altitude of 450 meters. All 257 people on board, including Peter Mulgrew, perished. Subsequent investigations confirmed this wasn't pilot error, but negligence by the airline. The incident became New Zealand's worst disaster, forcing Air New Zealand to permanently end all Antarctic sightseeing flights.